Christians clap back. Now Christians clap back. This phrase, clap back, is a cultural colloquialism used to express how one person responds to life's adversities. It's a way of saying how somebody responds when life gives you sour lemons. If I have any Empire fans here, you know Cookie is the queen of clapback. Because she always has something to say or something to do when somebody presents her with a situation she doesn't like. Clapping back culturally is a response that's not the most diplomatic response. Culture says that when you clap back in petty ways, just to see who the bigger person is. But as culture teaches us to clap back by its standards, Christ has exhorted us to clap back according to his spiritual standards, as shown here in our text. Book of James can be described as the Proverbs of the New Testament. Its content is more practical than philosophical. It is considered a very pragmatic book. James, the writer of this book, is writing to the Jews who have been dispersed at the hands of Herod Agrippa I. And he's writing from the point where he himself did not once believe in Jesus Christ. The half-brother of Jesus, now turned into the leader of the Jerusalem church, is writing to these Jews who have been scattered abroad, trying to give them some practical principles on how to handle life's daily affairs. He basically says, now that I know better, since I've come into the knowledge of who Jesus really is, and since I know better, now I can do better. He clearly points out in this passage that Christians are to rejoice when God ordains trials to strengthen their faith. That's the message of the text and a sermon in the sentence. Christians should rejoice when God ordains trials to strengthen our faith. The things that God sends us through are not for happenstance. It's not a coincidence or hocus pocus that you go through what you go through. God has designed some trials in your life to strengthen your faith. So according to the text, when you deal with those trials, you're to clap back and count it all joy. James here gives us the process of how to handle God-ordained trials. First, he exhorts us to rejoice for God-ordained trials. In that first verse, in verse number 2, he gives us a paradoxical mandate. He says, count it all joy, and then puts by it, when you fall into diverse temptations. Rejoice in trials. That doesn't make sense. How am I to rejoice in a time when I'm going through trials? Where do I have room to rejoice in trials? The answer is found in that word count. That word count in the Greek means to evaluate or to regard. It is an accounting term, which means when you bring up the sum total of your life, all the experiences that you go through, the end result ought to result in joy. And if I could lean into it another way, that same word count means to lead or to go before. It was used with princes, kings, and those in position as they led or went before somebody. So James, in a very paradoxical way, says, for the Christian, joy ought to be a priority when you face trials in your life. This is not a self-help tactic. This is a mandate given by the sovereign for his children. When you fall into diverse temptations, your response in clapping back should be to count it all joy. Note there the consistency of the joy you ought to have. He says, count it all Joy. Let me just hear the church say all. That means there is no exemption or stipulation that ought to change your response when you're dealing with trials in your life. Count it all joy. That response is consistent with what Scripture teaches, because for the believer, Scripture tells us we are to do two things consistent and continually through our lives. Christians ought to always pray. And Christians ought to always rejoice. 1 Thessalonians 5:16, rejoice evermore. Philippians 4:4, Paul tells the church to rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. But note where Paul says that rejoicing lies. He did not say to rejoice in your circumstance. He did not say to rejoice in the culture surrounding your circumstance. He said to rejoice in the Christ who lords over your circumstance. Whatever you face, when you realize your joy is found in Jesus, not in folks, friends, or finances, but your folks is found in Jesus. Your joy is found in Jesus. It will prompt you and propel you to rejoice in whatever you go through. Count it all joy. That's the consistency we ought to have. Count it all joy. But once again, he makes a paradoxical statement, because he tells us when we ought to rejoice. When you fall into diverse temptations or trials of various kinds. Note here the diversity of the trials. All right. One word in that text lets us know trials are an inevitable experience. When. It does not say if, as though there's some exemption that we will get out of life without going through trials. It says when, because the Bible teaches children of God, disciples of Jesus Christ, will go through trials in our lives. John 16:33, Jesus says, in this world, you will have tribulation. 2 Timothy 3:12, Paul says, those who live godly shall suffer persecution. The Christian journey is marked with destinations called trials. And if you bear the cross of Christianity, you are going to go through some things in your life. But note, he says temptations or trials. That word in the Greek means to test or to prove or to experiment something, which means God is using these trials as an experiment, as a test, or a proof of your faith. These trials are God ordained, not self-inflicted. We know that to be true because in verse 13, James says, let no man say that I am tempted of God. So this is a result of you bearing your cross, not you reaping your harvest. We be honest, some stuff that we go through ain't a result of God ordaining it. We put ourselves in those situations. But that's not what James is talking about in the text. He's talking about those God-ordained trials. And child of God, if you bear the cross of Christianity, God will ordain some trials that will come in your life. Don't worry, I've got witnesses. God ordained trials for Job when he lost everything. And for Daniel when he had Daniel go through the lion's den. And for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they went through the fiery furnace. And for Paul when he gave Paul a thorn in his flesh. He did it for Jesus when Jesus had to hang on a cross at Calvary. And he'll do it for you too. God ordains trials in our life just to prove something for us. So don't think you're going to get out of this life without trials. God ordains these trials for the building of our faith. And note, if the text is right, these trials won't be the same kinds of trials. All right. He says, when you fall into trials of diverse temptations or trials of various kinds, which means God is not predictable or bland when he sends trials your way. God will use various trials for various people for you to build your faith. For some of us, it may be sorrow. For others, it may be a situation. For some of us, it may be a spouse. Another, it may be a co-worker. For some, it may be friends or foes. For some of us, it may be finances. But all of us are going to have to experience some trials in our lives. But the diversity of the trial does not change the consistency in your response. Note the text didn't say no joy for no trials. It does not say some joy for some trials. The text says count it all joy for all trials. The diversity of the trial does not change the Christian's consistency in response. Whatever you go through, whenever you go through it, however you go through, your response ought to be counted all joy.
That's all right.
You ought to rejoice in God-ordained trials. Why are we to rejoice in God-ordained trials? Verse 3 lets us know there's a reason why we are to rejoice for God-ordained trials. Note the reason for God-ordained trials. Note how James starts verse number 3. He says, for you know. James makes the point clear that children of God, disciples of Christ, should not be ignorant or unlearned about why they go through the trials God has ordained for their lives. According to the Bible, church, we know. So when you ask the question, Lord, why am I going through what I'm going through? You don't have to go through that ignorantly. No, the Bible lets us know we know. Romans 5:3, we glory in tribulation, knowing tribulation worketh patience. Romans 8:28, and we know all things work together for the good of them that love God and are called according to His purpose. And if by chance the trials you go through call you out of time into eternity, for the Christian, we know if this earthly tabernacle is dissolved, we got another building, not made by hands, eternal in the heavens. So don't go through your God-ordained trials ignorantly. The text lets us know we know. What is it that we know? The trying of our faith produces steadfastness. Note that word trying in verse 3 is consistent with the word trials in verse 2. God uses trials to try our faith. The trials are used as God is trying our faith. Experiments are used as God is experimenting our faith. God uses trials as a part of His process to develop a faith, a steadfastness, or a patience that is relying on Him. The King James Version says, the trying of your faith worketh patience. And I must admit, Pastor Whitehead, when I first saw that word patience, I thought it was just that. The Lord is going to give me some patience to deal with trifling folks, trifling situations, trifling time. The Lord's going to give me patience to handle whatever I need to go through. But that's not what James is talking about in the text. That word patience is better translated steadfastness. God is using these trials to produce a steadfast faith that is built on Him, not the trials that you go through. So when God sends trials your way, God is really asking you the question, where is your faith? The steadfastness of that faith is not found in how much faith you have. The steadfastness is found in where your faith lies. When God ordained these trials to come into your life, He's really asking the question, where is your faith? Don't worry, I've got witnesses.